We've seen millions and millions of dollars wasted through middlemen initiatives, which cascade or theoretically trickle down and actually never make it to the ground. And it's always going to be the poorest communities that are actually bearing the biggest burden against that.
Welcome to Ground Truth from Eden People Plus Planet. We invite you to join us as we explore proven approaches to nature-based climate solutions through real-world experience and measurable results. We're showing what's possible when we invest in nature's capacity to address climate change. Ground Truth, nature-based climate solutions in action. Welcome to Eden People Plus Planet podcast. Today we want to talk a little bit about Eden's role in the carbon market and how we got there. As you know, I'm here with Brian Adkins, our CEO. Has been with us for a number of years now. We actually started very close together about 3 years ago when Eden, a reforestation-focused organization, had this idea that we should do a proof of concept whether Eden as an implementation, really an excellent implementation organization, could find its own voice and place in the carbon market. And so we did a proof of concept together and we found out a whole lot of things. We answered a lot of questions, but we came up with some things that I think it's going to be helpful for everybody to know. We need to talk through what is the carbon market, where are we in the carbon market, and what are the questions people should be asking about doing that. What do we need for capital? What do we need in partnership? I think there's plenty to unpack this morning. Brian, thoughts?
Thanks, Glenn. So yeah, it's been a learning journey. We obviously have been learning a lot about carbon markets, and carbon markets have been changing. One of the big things in the markets is that there are basically two big sides to it. There's the voluntary carbon market, and then there's the compliance market or regulated market. The regulated market is created at the sort of government to government level and the UN, and had protocols such as the Kyoto Protocol and now the Paris Agreement.
Right.
And the Paris Agreement sort of sets out the rules and the trading parameters for the market to operate, particularly under what's called Article 6 of the carbon market. In parallel to that, and much more active than that, has been the voluntary carbon market, where organizations that have a desire or a stated goal or a shareholder obligation to reduce their emissions or offset their emissions are operating in a way that they invest in projects to buy credits from those projects and use those to retire against their own internal obligation. But it's voluntary action.
Okay, so when you describe that to me, I see two things. I see on the one hand, in the voluntary market, this is, I would like to idealize it as personal responsibility. I see that there's something that I should do, or I'm making an impact, I want to engage it, and I can in this way. The compliance or regulatory market may be more driven by accountability, as you said, either from policy, government policy, or taxation, or that kind of impact on a company organization.
Sure.
Or even driven by board members' priorities or shareholders, or what a company is communicating to their market. So it's really a response to a popular movement.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, when we talk about this, you mentioned the Kyoto, you mentioned Paris, and we talk about the carbon market now as if something that, we all understand, or it's been around forever. How long has the carbon market really been around?
Carbon markets, and I say markets because there's several different markets. They have been around for almost 2 decades now, where they have been trading emissions reductions or removals. Reductions being an actual reduction in the greenhouse gas that's being emitted to the atmosphere, and a removal being an actual drawdown of that, removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and sequestering it. So there's a difference there, but the markets themselves have been trading those types of things for over 2 decades, actually. So it's not new, although like any concept, 20 years into the automobile market, for example, you didn't have a perfect automobile, but you had iterations of it. So that's where we are.
When we talk about a market, obviously, and trading and things like that, we have a financial economic implication, and we also have a product implication.
Yeah.
And so as you just kind of defined, the market is trading emission reduction we'll call them credits because that's
Sure.
what the common name is now, which is a predefined formula for how we measure this kind of an impact and how we want to quantify it and say this is the unit we're trading,
Yeah.
and so we have to pay for that. But what we're not just buying the credit, we're buying what the credit represents.
Sure.
Is all of this work behind, which is so how can you get a credit? What are the different ways someone can get a credit?
Yeah, there's lots of different segments of that. And so at Eden, what we were focusing on is generating credits from actions in the nature.
So nature-based
Nature,
solutions.
what we call nature-based solutions.
Okay.
So these are changes in the way we manage land, changes in the way we are planting trees and protecting coastlines, changes in the natural world and natural processes. So that could be agriculture, agroforestry, that type of stuff as well. There's a whole other group of ways that people generate whole other segments of the market that people are
Right. So I think
generating.
investing in nature is too risky. So I want to do it a different way. How do I do it?
Well, you could, reduce your emissions at your factory by changing out, inefficient processes and things
Okay.
like that. Or you can buy credits from someone who has done that and generated more mitigation than their own obligation.
Okay, stop for a second. So, and I know this is important that people understand. So one company can change their internal process, actually reduce their emissions, and so they're awarded a credit, evaluation of this thing, and they have they have saved more than they have spent, so to speak, and so they can sell that to another company.
That's right, and a lot of different systems work that way. So if I go out I'm running a factory and I set my baseline at, these are the emissions that I'm in my business as usual scenario, and then I generate more action against that baseline than my own inventory of emissions, then the excess could be traded. That is the extra mitigation, so to speak, or more abatement in some cases.
Right. And so generating that, so that's a company specific example. There are also capital markets behind the driving of how to handle this. And capital markets are notorious for setting up a practical valuation for managing risk, ensuring returns, and doing that. And so there are other means like direct air capture or solar or pollution reduction that also generate credits.
Yeah, absolutely. There are other ways people generate credits. Personally, I don't see why anyone would not want to be investing in nature, because nature, unlike direct air capture, for example, nature actually benefits on multiple bottom lines. So, for example, yes, you're generating the credit from nature, from planting the trees and from managing that land and showing that there are less emissions coming from that land than in the business as usual scenario. But you're also protecting habitat for wildlife and other biodiversity, which drives our agricultural systems and pollination and things like that. So huge value stream there. You're generating benefits for communities through stabilized soil and improved agricultural outcomes as well. You're generating additional benefits in addition to just the climate benefit. Direct air capture, yeah. They're generating a benefit for the climate. They're sucking out, carbon dioxide from the air and sequestering it. Multiple bottom lines is what we're looking for. And I think any investor should be looking for.
Because as you've said in other places, there's a difference between risk and uncertainty.
Absolutely. I think the perception that nature is risky is probably pretty misguided. Nature is uncertain. But risky, no, it's a de-risking behavior of investing in nature, because you're de-risking that future and all those other multiple bottom lines of benefits.
There's a term that goes around when we talk about the benefits of a nature-based solution, in this case, which are trying to monitor the co-benefits.
Yeah.
I think you've used the term core benefits instead.
Yeah.
Describe how that works and why that's important.
I can't take credit for the term core benefits. It was colleagues at another group called Wildlife Works that came up with that term. But core benefits to me is that, we use carbon dioxide and tons of carbon as a proximate for other things in nature, in natural systems, because that's what's happening. And we have a lot of science behind tons of carbon. We know how to estimate it fairly reasonably. So we know we burn this, we generate this much this many tons of carbon, et cetera. So we have pretty good science about that. But at the end of the day, who cares about carbon? Not many of us actually care on a daily basis about carbon. We care about our natural systems. We care about if there's water coming in our system. We care about if our soil is producing vegetables for us, and if our systems are functioning well. So those are actually the core benefits that we should be managing for. We use tons of carbon and subsequent credits as a way of approximating value and using that as some sort of tradable commodity. But at the end of the day, what we care about is our natural systems, and those natural systems that support all life on Earth.
So the key to the carbon market is translating the currency of the realm, a carbon credit, into actual value propositions that's supporting multiple outcomes at the same time that involve people, that involve nature, that involve the generational impact of all of the work that we do throughout the world. So it's a global issue. It's a planetary issue.
I mean, if you manage any system for just one variable, then you're missing the big picture. So if you manage any system that just says, okay, the only variable I'm managing for is how many tons of carbon I can draw out of the earth and sequester, you're managing for one variable and one variable only. Yes, it's simple. Yes, it's predictable. Yes, it's less risky, but it doesn't actually generate value across multiple bottom lines.
Okay.
And that's what we're trying to do with investing in nature-based solutions. Investing in nature-based solutions gives us that whole array of values. Is it complex? Yes, because we're managing for multiple variables at the same time. We're managing land for large wildlife. You're managing land for pollination and for ensuring that the insect life is protected. But you're also then managing for ensuring that large wildlife doesn't go into the agricultural belt next door and smash it up and drive everyone's cost of living up and create a lot of conflict, human wildlife conflict. So when you're managing landscapes, yes, you're managing for a lot of variables, but the ability to generate value across multiple variables, across multiple bottom lines, is what the real benefit is.
Okay, so when you say that, and I think that's a great framing of what the work is and how we have to do it, we know from our experience, and Eden is an organization that is implemented, around the world, that every country that we're in, every area and region that we're in is slightly different.
Sure.
Every forest type is a little bit different, and that's why we have to go through an elaborate design process to come up with this. All right. So it seems very individualistic and a very individual and highly differentiated approach to be successful in the areas that we do, which is part of the reason we have said we want, instead of having disaggregated plots all over the place, we want to focus on a larger landscape that has multiple communities, that have multiple impact, that has an entire ecosystem that we can manage for the maximum input. Okay, now that said, what is the role in the world of people working together to do this? So there's lots of carbon developers, there's lots of designers, there's lots of implementers, and then we have groups that are the UN. And we have, the Conference of Parties, the COP, every year that goes through where we try to policy everything. If we can't get things done regionally and effectively as an individual or a small group, we institutionalize it, kind of human nature. How effective is that in general in moving the needle on climate change and making the pathways accessible for this kind of work to be done?
That's a really good question. On the one hand, I'm a big proponent of partnerships, and you have to be, because there's no person here that can do everything.
Yes.
And these are large, complex, multi-decadal investments, multi-decadal projects that you're undertaking across a huge landscape and across multiple management variables. So there's no way on earth anyone can do all of those things. So you need partnerships with people who have specialties.
Sure.
And you need partnerships with people who have expertise in a given realm or another that informs the overall picture.
Yeah.
You need an orchestrator of all of that in the form of a good project developer, but you need to have those specialty partnerships that deliver that. Where I think looking at the last 20 years, one of the big issues that we have encountered is that a lot of the investment in this space, and a lot of the capital investments, and also the multilateral development funds, a lot of the government to government funding, taxpayers' money, is actually going into multiple middlemen. We've seen this proliferation of middlemen organizations that offer conduits to projects, but a lot of that money never makes it to projects.
Once everybody takes their slice, there's nothing for the ground.
Yeah, a lot of that money is just not making it to the ground, and it's just not making it to the communities that are actually trying to make that choice, that hard choice of, do we cut down our forest, or do we use it for inclusion in a carbon project that's going to pay us for the services that this forest is providing? If the money's not making it there, they're not going to make that decision in the positive way that we're hoping they will. They're going to make it in the decision that is life-changing for them, which is, I'm going to have to leverage this today so that I can live tomorrow and pay my kids' school fees or my medical bill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
That's the reality that the most people that live adjacent to a forest are having to make. If that money is going through 15 different institutions before it gets there, it's the most inefficient way to deploy capital possible. And this is often taxpayers' money. So it should be, we should be taking great care in ensuring that it is being effective and impactful.
Right.
But instead, we're sending it to institutions along the way that are, using it to pay all kinds of things that are superfluous to the actual outcomes that we are looking for and the actual impacts on the ground.
So what's the place of the role of the UN in something like this, and participating in that? Is it still worthwhile?
That's a good question. It's pretty loaded.
Okay.
The UN as an institution is really important for bringing and convening the parties that we need to act, and all act in the same direction in order to make an impact that is globally felt. Because climate change is a global issue, and beyond climate change, biodiversity and ecosystem services, like we've talked about, are global issues. And ensuring that those continue to function, those are global issues. So you need some sort of convening space where people can get aligned with strategies, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. But so much money has been wasted on UN programs, and this is a lot of taxpayers' money that's going into these types of programs that then they hire consultants and further hire sub-consultants and further hire sub-consultants to do work. That money never makes it down to actual taking care of ensuring that there's an incentive structure in place to mitigate deforestation and degradation. Rarely ever does it get there. We've seen millions and millions of dollars wasted through middlemen initiatives, which cascade or theoretically trickle down and actually never make it to the ground. And it's always going to be the poorest communities that are actually bearing the biggest burden against that.
Sure. So I think it wouldn't be hard to recognize, or maybe even assume, that there's cynicism or skepticism over government involvement anytime you're trying to do something practical.
This is why there's two markets. I mean, this is why there's a voluntary carbon market in parallel to the regulated market.
Okay.
Because the voluntary market is like, well, we need to do something and this is capital that was deployed through private sector organizations often. And that's why the voluntary market exists, because waiting for markets that were designed by governments and consultants and UN processes that take 10, 15, 20 years to develop, is too long.
So are we at a place where it's kind of the emperor's new clothes, where someone needs to ring a bell, or do we all just understand that this is a necessary function? We just have to do this because it's the place where multinational people can get together and get aligned, as you say. So that has an intrinsic value, even though there's waste.
I think there's a merger going on. We have these two separate markets, and they're starting to merge. So the Paris Agreement and the Article 6 markets that are designed within that, although they are separate markets still, and Article 6.4 is a UN market like a clearinghouse essentially.
Okay.
There is a bit of a merger. So voluntary carbon markets can generate credits that could be used in those types of transactions in the hopefully the near future. So there's a merger of that going on. What we haven't gotten over is this the inefficient deploying of capital.
Okay.
How that capital is deployed and how proximal the capital is to the project on the ground of being implemented. There's a lot of potential for it to become more and more efficient the more distant it is from it. So we still need to tighten that up in order for it to have, we know that markets are actually the most efficient way of driving action on the ground. We've seen that time and time and time again. Is there a role for regulatory markets or regulated entities in that? Absolutely. But, the idea that markets can drive actual change on the ground is well established. We've seen it time and time again.
If you were a consultant hired by a group of either national or organizations like companies or even governments, and they said, what should we be looking for in order to get the maximum capital to the ground? What is that? What do we look for?
Well, I mean, I'm going to toot our own horn here, but being vertically integrated is really, really important because you need to be able to have those discussions with the investors directly and then know that you have the quality control and safeguards in place to implement directly and the relationships in place to implement directly. You're not using a series of middlemen to do that implementation. You're actually doing the work yourself. The quality control, QA, QC, safeguards, checks, balances. You're controlling all of that. Really important in ensuring quality.
And the accountability is in the verification process, which is third party and administrated by registries, et cetera. So that allows for the
transparency, the standardization, the audits, those exist. Now, are there problems with it? Are things that need to be improved? Of course. With everything in life there are. The idea that it's going to be perfect from the get-go is unrealistic.
Sure.
And are there legitimate criticisms in that process? Yes. But it's still the most efficient means that we have. And I think it's the most efficient way to drive action on the ground.
So if I hear you correctly, when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about value systems and making a long-term impact. Nature-based solutions, even on an objective level, is kind of a head and shoulder above the rest of other options for earning a carbon credit or working in that realm because of its multiple outcomes, its co and core benefits, its impact on people, on planet, and things. And a vertically integrated organization that can do that is probably the best first start if you can find that. So for all the reasons you just mentioned, and then having a seat at the table and a voice in a place like the UN at COP, where policy and alignment on a global basis is still happening, is still important. What's the impact to an organization or process like the UN or COP or something when a country pulls out of their partnership in that?
It's a good question. It depends on the country. It depends on the weight behind that. In the case of the U.S., for example, it's going to be a process. It's going to take to pull out of the Paris Agreement. It's going to take a year or so. But virtually, other than signaling a change in policy direction, the virtual impact will be, it's still to be seen. We have to wait and see what's going to happen. But, the predictive, I think very little. The impact is actually going to be very little. Far more important is the actual audit that the Trump administration is conducting of all public expenditure, taxpayers' money being expended through USAID and things like that. Far more impactful because so much of the money that was being spent in multilateral development organizations and in multilateral grants, in bilateral granting and things like that is done through USAID and other federal agencies. And a lot of it is wasted. Like we have to be frank about that. A lot of it is wasted. A lot of it is spent on everything from per diems to silly workshops that don't actually accomplish anything after 15 years. Reports, things like this that don't actually accomplish anything. So a lot of it is wasted, and doing an audit of public expenditure is a really good way to generate efficiency. So understanding how that money is being spent, how it could be spent more efficiently instead of through multiple agencies and multiple workshops and per diems and all of
Sure.
this stuff is a really important and very, very serious change that has happened. The U.S. pulling out of the Paris Agreement, it's a virtue signaling thing.
But even so we've covered politic and policy. We talk about waste, and we talk about inexact processes, and and even in the markets that we have.
Yeah.
What do you say to that ESG, SDG officer? What do we say to that philanthropist? What do we say to the employee who says, I want to make a difference, but when I read the articles that come out, or there's that much skepticism or cynicism or so much waste that I give up. I don't even know how to make a difference anymore. And they'll find a different way to meet their own need. But how can we keep those people engaged and encouraged that there is a way to make a difference for people, for planet, for generations to come, that even though imperfect is still a right and good investment?
A really good question. I think being able to appeal directly, and we have the tools now to appeal directly to a lot of people. We don't have to, it's not like, 100 years ago when we had to try and convene people in ways that we, could never actually do now. So we have the ability to appeal directly to people that actually want to do things, actually want to get things done, actually want to see action on the restoration of natural systems happen. Remember, carbon markets are not supposed to be some panacea. Carbon markets are supposed to be a way to drive investment into activities that were more sustainable and activities that preserved nature or restored nature. And then, of course, all of these other sectors have grown out of that as well, especially the emissions reduction side of things and removals. But carbon markets were designed to be something that drove investment into that. They weren't designed to be some giant science experiment where you had to have this level of uncertainty and this level of variance, and that was the only thing tolerable. So our focus has sort of gone down that way when we actually need to be focused on how to maximize investment in these things because it's a de-risking behavior for our future. And that's where the appeal to ESG officers, the appeal to people who actually want to have an impact long term and have not only the legacy for themselves or a legacy for their organization or their company, but actually this de-risking behavior over generations. That's the real appeal, and you have to do that on an individual basis.
Where would you put, I think that's a great explanation. Thank you very much for that. Where would you put the idea then for the idea of capital funds, green capital funds?
I think they're incredibly important. We have to have green capital funds, and they're going to be that J curve where you're going to have an investment probably won't pay off for a while. You've got to prime the pump, so to speak, before it's actually going to have that long-term return. But the long-term return is there, and it could be in the form of credits in a carbon project or a portfolio of carbon projects, or it can be in the form of decreasing the risk to your supply chains or your value chains. If you're in the large commodities, things like coffee or tea or one of these things, climate change, and it presents serious threats to those supply chains.
Right.
So you're de-risking that market in the future too by investing in things today like forests, investing in water projects and in projects that restore these systems. So whether you're getting credits as a return or you're getting less complicated supply chains, those are both wins for an investor or for an industry.
Just to wrap up the thinking on carbon markets then, voluntary and regulatory, governmental process, integrated companies, individual funds like green capital funds that are moving things around. It's imperfect, it's there. What do we need? What does the consumer, the investor, the corporate leader, what do they need to be thinking about to intelligently move towards an investment in not just carbon, because that's not the issue. It's in the outcomes, right? what do they need to be thinking? What's the mindset that they need to adopt so that they're coming at it in the right way, not just symptomatically?
I think we need to think of things we have to think of things in the big picture. So we talked earlier about a systems approach.
Sure.
We need to be thinking about the whole system. The emphasis on carbon markets, and specifically even more narrowly, carbon credits and the veracity of that carbon credit, is a bit of a distraction.
Good.
It's become the obsession of, oh, the science. Your science is not as good as my science. And, there's these ludicrous arguments that are going on right now about that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Complete distractions from the systems thinking that we need to be thinking about. The systems thinking says, the stability of this entire system, and I'm talking about the global system of trade, of economics, of the reliance on our natural systems to be stable and to provide us with regular rainfall, with pollination, with soil stability, with all of those things that people depend on. And when those people don't have those things, they will move. Mm-hmm. And where are they going to move to? The places that are more stable. So all of our systems, and there goes your labor, there goes your supply chain, there goes all of your things are moving. If we're not thinking in this system, this global system, and you don't have to be a globalist to think that way, you have to be thinking of it as a system. And if you don't think of it as a system and you concentrate on this one little piece of it, then you're missing that big picture. And that's what we can't afford to do.
Right. And so I think that there was, we had talked about the tree became a distraction. We lost the forest for the trees.
Yes, absolutely.
And we can't do the same thing in carbon and lose the potential impact in nature-based solutions through a carbon credit.
Absolutely.
And a systems thinking, and the picture that came to mind, and maybe this is helpful, is it's like having children. It's like, if your goal in having children is I want a baby, then you're gonna have that and have satisfaction for 1.5 to 2 years, and then it's a toddler. But I didn't want a toddler. I wanted babies. So what do we do with that? It's like, no, we have family systems. We have a family. We invest in family because of the longevity of that, of replicating our values, of ensuring survivability, of all of those things that are long-term, that we understand take time, are imperfect, and have ups and downs along the way, but we do it because it's the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do, but you don't give up in the middle. And so when we talk about investment too, I think we want to talk about the long-term of, we don't give up on our kids. We don't give up on our planet. We don't give up on our fellow humans. We get into this because we know these things are the right thing to do, and then we wisely choose vehicles like integrated companies, like nature-based solutions, to say these are the things that will get us where we want to go 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 100 years, when it no longer is about me. That I did, for my part, I did the right thing. So I think the systems thinking is going to be an imperative mindset shift for many people.
And using the same analogy then, you do not take your family and only invest in 2 or 3 parts of it and externalize the rest of it. Right. You don't externalize all the other things that are needed. Say, okay, well, I'm only going to feed and clothe the kid, and I'm only going to, house the kid twice a year. You don't. That's just not rational behavior. In the same way, why externalizing all the costs, and this is one of the downsides of our markets. The downsides our markets have externalized all those costs to the environment, but we need to now internalize that through our natural capital accounting, and realize that the costs of doing these things are bigger, and therefore we need to invest in things that de-risk those for the future. And the same way you do that with your family.
Good words, Brian. Thanks for the conversation.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us on Ground Truth. To learn more about Eden's work in landscape restoration and explore partnership opportunities in nature-based climate solutions, visit eden-plus.org. If you found value in today's conversation, please share it with others working to create positive climate action through natural solutions. Ground Truth is a production of Eden People Plus Planet.